This webinar is a quick overview of the Teacher Incentive Allotment performance standards, as well as the Texas Tech University data validation process. The TIA performance standards were based on statewide performance. They were established by looking at teacher observation and student growth performance for teachers across the state. Recognized represents the performance of the top 33% of teachers across the state. Exemplary represents the performance of the top 20% of teachers across the state. And master represents the performance of the top 5% of teachers across the state. These performance standards are meant to serve as guidelines, not as a requirement for teachers. Also, districts' designated teacher numbers do not need to align to these percentages. Districts may have percentages above and below these marks. Any teacher that meets a local designation system's eligibility requirements and the minimum proficiency observation ratings may be submitted for a designation. For student growth performance standards, STAR student assessment data was looked at across 5 years, the 2014-15 school year to the 2018-19 school year. A value-added model was then developed to determine if a student met or exceeded their growth expectation. The percentages that you see on this slide are the percent of students that met or exceeded their growth target for each of the different designation levels. The teacher observation performance standards were established by looking at t-test scores across the state, looking at only domains 2 and 3. No other domains were included in this calculation. Cut scores were then established for each of the different designation levels. If a district is using a rubric other than t-tests, they should reference the percent of possible points. One additional thing to note for these standards is that all teachers must perform at proficient or above on all observable domains of their appraisal rubric in order to be eligible to earn a designation. One frequently asked question that we receive a lot is, how do I use statewide performance standards in the development and design of my system as well as in making designation decisions? Performance standards are intended to serve as a guide and reference when developing your local designation system, as well as when making designation decisions. It provides districts a way to see how teachers across the state performed on teacher observation and student growth in comparison to their own teachers. Since districts can use multiple components in determining designations for their teachers, and because these values are statewide averages, it is anticipated that districts will have teachers that perform above and below these values. Districts will submit one data file through a secure online portal. The data file contains 3 main components: district information, which includes supplemental narrative questions regarding data submission, weighting, which is from their TIA system application, and data entry, where districts will be providing unique information and performance data on their teachers. The data file will include data on all teachers in eligible teaching assignments, as well as identify which of those teachers are being put forth for a new or higher designation. How will districts' data be validated? There will be 5 domains comprised of 9 scored checks and 2 unscored supplemental checks. The overall score for the data validation process will be from the 9 scored checks. Final approval is a holistic approach on an individual basis, looking at both the data validation score and system application, as well as any other supplemental information provided during data submission. Check number 1 is a correlation check that looks at the relationship between teacher observation scores and the percent of students that met or exceeded their growth expectation. All teachers are included in this check, and teacher designations are not used as part of the analysis. Districts have the most control over this check than any other check in the process because it is a local decision on what observation rubric and student growth measures they're using in determining these values. Scores for this check are based on the strength of the relationship between teacher observation scores and percent of students that met or exceeded their growth expectation. Check number 2 looks at how closely aligned district designations are to value-add designations. This check confirms the relationship between district designations for teachers and their corresponding VAM designations. This check will only include designated teachers and only designated teachers that have a corresponding value-add designation. All other teachers are excluded from this check. Scores for this check are based on the strength of the relationship between district and value-add designations. Check number 3 looks at the proximity of district designations to VAM designations. This check uses a table to score points for individual teachers based on their proximity to their corresponding VAM designation. This check will only include designated teachers and only designated teachers that have a corresponding value-add designation. All other teachers are excluded from this check. Scores for this check are based on the average points for teachers based on the scoring system from the table. Please reference the table on the data validation documents found on our website. Checks 4 through 7 look at the overall effect that a campus, teacher category, or assignment has on a designation. The check confirms the degree of inter-rater reliability for observation and growth judgments and compares the effect campus, teacher category, or assignment have on each of the 3 designation groups, recognized, exemplary, and master. Scores are based on the effect the campus, teacher category, or assignment has on these designation groups. Checks 8 through 9 look at how closely aligned designated teachers are to the statewide performance standards. It looks at both teacher observation and percent of students that met or exceeded their growth expectation for designated teachers to see how closely they align with the statewide performance standards. Scoring for each individual teacher is based on proximity to the statewide performance standards. Only designated teachers are used in this check, and scores are based on the average point score for all designated teachers. Supplemental check number 10 looks at how similar designated teacher proportions are to comparable Domain 2A rated campuses. For example, the proportion of master teachers for a C-rated campus should be in similar proportions to that of other C-rated campuses across the state. All teachers were used in the check to determine the proportions, and teacher designations were used in order to calculate these values. Scores are based on how closely aligned district campus proportions are to the statewide campus proportions of like Domain 2A rated campuses. Supplemental check number 11 looks at the spread of teacher observation scores across the district. The expectation is that observation scores for the district will be distributed in a manner that gives some evidence about the ability of the district to differentiate between effective and ineffective teachers. Scores are calculated based on the standard deviation of observation scores among teachers across the district. To summarize the data validation process, Domain A looks at the correlation between teacher observation and student growth scores. Domain B compares district designations with value-add designations. Domain C looks at the effect campus, teacher category, or assignment have on designations. Domain D compares designated teachers' observation and growth scores to the statewide performance standards. And Domain E, comprised of unscored supplemental checks used to provide additional data for districts. Thank you for taking the time to view this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to TIA@tea.texas.gov.